chance meeting between a white woman and a black homeless man sparks an unexpected journey of healing and transformation. What starts as a simple act of kindness unfolds into a story of second chances and the deep impact of human connection, changing both their lives in ways they never imagined. Lily hurried down the crowded city streets, weaving her way through throngs of people as the sun dipped lower behind the skyscrapers. The noise of the city was a constant hum around her, car horns, chatter from people passing by, the rhythmic clatter of the subway far beneath her feet. This was the life she knew, the rush, the grind, always moving from one place to another, from one case to the next. Her days as a social worker had become an endless loop of paperwork, home visits, and the often overwhelming weight of the lives she was trying to piece back together. But even though her job was consuming, it had purpose, and that purpose was what kept her going. She looked like any other woman her age, late 20s, sharp features softened by kindness, her brown hair pulled back in a loose bun, her expression focused but tinged with an edge of exhaustion. Her clothes were practical, not flashy. Simple jeans and a coat she'd worn for several winters. The world around her was busy, alive, and yet she always felt just a step removed, as though there was a thin barrier between her and the vibrancy of life that others seemed to experience so effortlessly. The truth was, for as long as she could remember, Lily had been carrying something inside her that made it hard to fully engage with the present. It was as if she was constantly walking with a shadow behind her, a heaviness that never quite lifted. It was the memory of her father. He had been a police officer, a good one, someone the community had looked up to. Lily had adored him when she was a little girl, following him around whenever she could, always eager to hear his stories from work. He was larger than life to her, a protector, someone who made her feel safe in a world that could be so unpredictable. But then, one day, everything changed. She could still remember the knock at the door, her mother's trembling hands as she opened it, the hollow look on the officer's face who delivered the news. Her father had been hit by a car in a hit and run. It was quick, they said. He wouldn't have felt much, as if that could somehow lessen the pain of his absence. The years that followed his death had been hard, harder than she knew how to express. Her mother fell apart, sinking into a quiet, private grief that left little room for Lily's own emotions. And then there was Derek, her brother, who had been so close to their father. He was older than Lily by a few years, and she had always looked up to him. But after their father's death, Derek changed. He withdrew, growing angrier, more distant, until one day he disappeared entirely. She hadn't heard from him in years. It was the weight of that loss, of those unresolved questions, that had driven Lily to where she was now. Being a social worker wasn't just a job. It was a way to channel her pain into something constructive, to make sure that no one else felt as alone as she had. And yet, no matter how many people she helped, how many lives she touched, there was still that emptiness inside her that nothing seemed to fill. The day was winding down as she turned the corner toward the subway station. Her apartment was only a few stops away, and the familiarity of her routine brought a small comfort. The crowds had thinned as evening set in, but the station was still alive with movement. Commuters rushing home, buskers playing tunes for spare change, the occasional person standing off to the side, lost in their own world. It was then that she saw him. At first glance, Alex didn't seem to stand out from the dozens of others who passed by every day. He was sitting on one of the benches near the far wall of the station, his head down, shoulders slumped, a hood pulled low over his face. He looked like he was hiding from the world, like someone who had given up long before anyone had noticed. His clothes were worn, threadbare in places, and his shoes looked as though they had walked far too many miles. What struck Lily most, though, was the stillness about him. While everyone else in the station seemed to be in motion, full of energy and purpose, Alex just sat there, completely motionless, as if he had nowhere to go, nothing to do, and no reason to try. She paused, her eyes lingering on him for a moment longer than usual. It wasn't uncommon to see people like him in the city, people who had fallen on hard times, who had slipped through the cracks of society. She dealt with them every day in her job, people struggling with poverty, homelessness, addiction. But there was something about the way Alex sat there, so utterly defeated, that made her heart ache in a way she couldn't quite explain. For a brief second, she considered walking past him, continuing on her way home like everyone else. After all, she had already spent her entire day helping others. She was tired, emotionally drained, and all she wanted was to collapse on her couch with a cup of tea and shut out the world for a few hours. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the memory of her father, or maybe it was just the innate pull she felt toward anyone in pain. Whatever it was, Lily couldn't bring herself to ignore him. Without fully knowing what she was going to say, she took a deep breath and walked over to where Alex was sitting. "Hey," she said softly, her voice tentative but kind. Alex didn't look up at first. His head remained bowed, his shoulders hunched against the cold. For a moment she wondered if he had even heard her, or if he would just ignore her, like so many others had done in the past. But then slowly he lifted his head and looked at her. His eyes were dark, heavy with exhaustion, and something else. Something deeper that Lily couldn't quite place. "Are you hungry?" she asked, offering him a small smile. "There's a diner nearby. I could get you something to eat." For a long time, Alex didn't say anything. He just stared at her, as if trying to figure out whether she was genuine or just another person pretending to care. He had seen people like her before, people who offered kindness only when it was convenient for them, people who disappeared just as quickly as they came. But something in Lily's voice, in the way she looked at him, made him hesitate. Finally, he nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "Yeah," he muttered, his voice rough from disuse. "I'm hungry." Lily's smile widened, a small sense of relief washing over her. She motioned for him to follow her, and together they made their way out of the subway station and into the cool evening air. The diner was just a few blocks away, a small, unassuming place that served cheap but filling meals. It wasn't much, but it was warm and welcoming, and that was enough. They sat across from each other in a booth near the back, the flickering neon sign outside casting a soft glow on the table between them. Lily ordered for both of them, keeping the conversation light at first. She asked him about his day, where he was from, trying to break through the walls he had built around himself. Alex answered her questions with short, clipped responses, still unsure of her motives. He was used to people walking away, used to being invisible, but something about Lily's persistence made him want to give her a chance, even if just for one night. When the food arrived, Alex ate quickly, barely pausing between bites. It was clear he hadn't had a proper meal in days, maybe longer. Lily watched him silently, her heart breaking for him. She didn't know his story yet, but she could see the pain etched into every line of his face, the weariness in his eyes that spoke of battles fought and lost. As he finished his meal, Lily hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I have an extra room at my apartment," she said softly. "If you need a place to stay for the night, you can shower, get some rest. No pressure, though." Alex looked at her, his expression guarded. He had learned a long time ago not to trust offers like this. People meant well, but they rarely followed through. Still, the thought of a warm bed in a hot shower was too tempting to ignore, especially after the weeks he had spent sleeping in shelters and on park benches. After what felt like an eternity, he nodded. "Okay," he said quietly. "Just for the night." Lily smiled, a mixture of relief and hope settling in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the start of something good. Lily led Alex back to her apartment, the two of them walking in silence through the city streets. The occasional car passed by, headlights cutting through the growing darkness. The hum of the city surrounded them, but there was a stillness between them, a quiet acknowledgement of something neither of them had words for yet. It was strange, offering this stranger a place in her home. But Lily had always followed her instincts, and right now her instincts were telling her that this was the right thing to do. When they arrived at her building, a modest apartment complex tucked away on a quieter street, she motioned for him to follow her inside. They climbed the stairs to the third floor, the creaky sound of their footsteps echoing in the stairwell. Lily unlocked the door and pushed it open, stepping aside to let Alex enter first. The apartment was small but cozy, with warm, earth-toned walls and simple, functional furniture. A small sofa sat across from a bookshelf filled with social work textbooks, a few novels, and framed photographs of Lily with her father. The space was lived in but well kept, the kind of place that felt like a sanctuary from the chaos outside. "Make yourself at home," Lily said, gesturing toward the small living room. "The bathroom's down the hall, and there are clean towels in the closet if you want a shower." Alex hesitated at the doorway, as though unsure if he should cross the threshold. It had been a long time since he had been inside someone's home, a real home, not just a shelter or some rundown motel. He glanced around the apartment, taking in the warmth and comfort of the place. It felt foreign, almost surreal after the cold, hard streets. But something about Lily's calm demeanor made him feel safe, or at least safer than he had felt in a long time. "Thanks," he muttered, his voice low, almost unsure of itself. Lily gave him a nod and disappeared down the hallway, giving him a moment to adjust. After a few seconds, Alex took a deep breath and stepped inside. The warmth of the apartment wrapped around him like a blanket, a stark contrast to the biting cold of the night air outside. He stood there for a moment, his hands hanging at his sides, unsure of what to do with himself. Then slowly he made his way down the hall to the bathroom, where he found fresh towels neatly folded on a shelf next to a bar of soap and a bottle of shampoo. The bathroom itself was small but clean, with white tiles that reflected the soft glow of the overhead light. Alex stared at his reflection in the mirror for a long time, his face gaunt and unshaven, his hair matted from weeks of neglect. He barely recognized the man staring back at him. The man in the mirror looked older than his 30 years, worn down by the weight of the world. His clothes hung loosely on his frame, his eyes hollowed by exhaustion. He couldn't remember the last time he had looked at himself this closely, let alone had the chance to clean up. After a moment, he turned on the shower, the sound of water filling the small room. Stripping off his clothes, he stepped under the hot stream, letting the water wash over him. It felt like a baptism, the heat soothing the aches in his muscles, washing away the grime and the weariness that had clung to him for so long. He closed his eyes, standing under the spray for what felt like forever, letting the sensation of warmth and cleanliness fill him. It was a small thing, but it felt monumental. When he finally stepped out of the shower, steam filled the room, fogging the mirror. Alex dried off with one of the towels and changed into the clothes Lily had left for him. A simple pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt, clearly meant to provide comfort. He gathered up his dirty clothes, folding them carefully, as if they were something precious. He didn't have much, and what little he did have had become all the more important in the absence of everything else. Returning to the living room, he found Lily sitting on the couch, a cup of tea in her hands and an open book in her lap. She glanced up when he entered, offering him a small smile. She didn't ask any questions, didn't pry. It was as though she understood that he needed the space to process everything, to let his guard down slowly. "Feel better?" she asked, her voice gentle. Alex nodded, not trusting himself to say much more than that. He wasn't used to this quiet kindness, this generosity that came without expectation. People didn't just help you for no reason, not in his experience. There was always a catch, always something they wanted in return. But Lily didn't seem like that. She seemed genuine, and that made him feel uneasy, as if it were all too good to be true. Lily gestured toward the small dining table in the corner of the room. "I made some tea if you want some. There's food in the fridge, too, if you're still hungry." Alex hesitated, unsure if he should take her up on the offer. He wasn't used to asking for help, and he certainly wasn't used to accepting it, but there was a warmth in her voice that made him feel like it was okay to let his guard down. Just a little. "Tea would be nice," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lily smiled and stood, walking over to the kitchen to pour him a cup. As she moved around the apartment, Alex felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. It was as if, for the first time in a long time, he didn't have to be on high alert. He didn't have to worry about where he was going to sleep or where his next meal was coming from. It was a small, fleeting moment of peace, and he held on to it tightly. When Lily returned with the tea, she handed it to him and sat back down on the couch, folding her legs beneath her. They sat in silence for a while, the sound of the city outside their only company. Alex sipped the tea, feeling its warmth spread through his chest, and for the first time in what felt like years, he allowed himself to relax, if only for a moment. After a while, Lily spoke again, her voice soft and unassuming. I'm not going to ask you any questions if you don't want to talk, but if you do, I'm here. Alex looked down at the cup in his hands, the steam rising in soft tendrils. He wanted to say something, to explain how he had ended up here, sitting in a stranger's apartment, with nothing but the clothes on his back and the ghosts of his past. But the words were stuck in his throat, heavy and tangled. I don't even know where to start, he finally said, his voice rough and tired. Lily nodded as if she understood that feeling all too well. You don't have to start anywhere, she said. We've got time. And so they sat there in the quiet of the evening, two strangers who had somehow found their way into each other's lives. The weight of the world still pressed down on Alex's shoulders, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel quite so unbearable. The days passed slowly, and Alex found himself slipping into a kind of routine. He stayed in the small room that Lily had offered him, keeping to himself for the most part, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, they began to talk more. At first it was just small talk, Lily asking him how he was doing, if he needed anything. But as time went on, their conversations deepened. One night, as they sat together in the living room, Alex began to open up, the words spilling out before he could stop them. He told her about his life before everything had fallen apart, how he had been an architect, working on big projects full of ambition and drive. He told her about Emma, his fiancée, and how they had been planning to start a life together, how everything had seemed so perfect, right up until the night it all came crashing down. It was raining, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. We were driving home from dinner. I don't even remember what we were talking about. Something stupid, probably. And then the car skidded on the road and we went off the side. She died before the ambulance even got there. Lily listened quietly, her heart breaking for him. She had seen that kind of pain before, in the people she worked with, but hearing it from Alex, seeing the way it had hollowed him out, made it all the more real. I couldn't handle it, Alex continued, his voice thick with emotion. I lost everything after that. I couldn't work, couldn't focus. I just kept thinking about her, about how it should have been me. Lily reached out, placing a hand on his arm, a silent gesture of understanding. She knew what it was like to lose someone, to have the world fall apart in an instant. You don't have to go through this alone, she said softly. There's help out there. Support groups, therapy. I know it's not easy, but you don't have to carry this by yourself. Alex shook his head, his jaw clenched. I don't know if I can, he said. I've been like this for so long. I don't know if I can change. Lily's hand remained steady on his arm, her voice gentle but firm. You can, she said. It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to happen overnight. But you've already taken the first step, just by being here. That's something. For a long moment, Alex didn't say anything. He just sat there, staring at the floor, trying to process everything. It felt like too much, all at once. But at the same time, there was a small part of him, a tiny flickering part, that wanted to believe her, that wanted to believe that there was a way out of the darkness. The next morning, Alex took the first step. He agreed to go with Lily to a support group for trauma survivors. It was a small, quiet meeting held in the basement of a community center, with a handful of people gathered in a circle, sharing their stories. At first, Alex didn't say much. He listened, taking in the stories of others who had been through similar experiences, who had lost loved ones, who had faced their own demons. It was both comforting and terrifying, knowing that he wasn't alone in his pain. As the weeks went on, Alex began to open up more in the group. He talked about Emma, about the accident, about how he had spiraled afterward. The people in the group listened without judgment, offering support and understanding in a way that felt different from anything he had experienced before. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the weight on his shoulders began to lift. But just as Alex was beginning to feel a glimmer of hope, the past came crashing back into his life in an unexpected way. It happened one afternoon when Lily was at work and Alex was alone in her apartment. He had been tidying up, trying to keep himself busy, when he stumbled upon a small, worn scrapbook tucked away in the bottom of a drawer. Curious, he opened it, flipping through the pages. At first, it seemed like a collection of childhood memories, Photos of a young Lily with her family, her father in his police uniform, smiling proudly beside her. But as he turned the pages, the scrapbook took a darker turn. There in the middle of the book was a newspaper clipping about a hit-and-run accident. The headline read, "Police officer killed in hit-and-run tragedy." Alex's heart sank as he read the article, piecing together the story of Lily's father. He had been killed while on duty, struck by a car that had never been identified. The article went on to describe the impact his death had on the community, but Alex's mind was focused on something else. The look in Lily's eyes whenever she talked about her father, the pain she had carried all these years. When Lily returned home that evening, she found Alex sitting on the couch, the scrapbook open in his lap. He looked up at her, his expression conflicted. "I didn't mean to pry," he said softly. "I found this in the drawer." Lily's face softened as she saw the scrapbook, her eyes lingering on the photo of her father. She sat down beside Alex, her hands resting in her lap. "It's okay," she said quietly. "I don't talk about him much. It still hurts, even after all this time." Alex nodded, understanding all too well what she meant. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice sincere. "I didn't know." Lily gave him a small, sad smile. "It's not something I talk about with many people," she admitted. "But I guess it's something we have in common now, isn't it? We've both lost people." They sat there in silence for a while, the weight of their shared grief hanging between them. In that moment, something shifted. They had been two strangers brought together by circumstance, but now they were bound by something deeper, by the pain they had both endured, and the healing they were both still searching for. Lily took a deep breath, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I've been carrying this around for so long," she said. "It feels like it's never going to go away. But seeing you, seeing how you're trying to move forward, it gives me hope. Maybe we can help each other somehow." Alex looked at her, his expression softening. "Maybe we can," he said quietly. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a promise, a quiet understanding that they were no longer alone in their pain. The days following that quiet evening with the scrapbook passed in a haze of slow but meaningful changes. Both Lily and Alex had begun to share more of themselves, bit by bit, as though peeling away layers of protective armor they had worn for far too long. Each conversation, each vulnerable admission, seemed to strengthen the bond between them. Neither of them said it aloud, but they both felt it. They were helping each other in ways they hadn't imagined when Lily first reached out to Alex in that subway station. The small apartment, once just Lily's refuge from the world, now felt like a place of healing for both of them. But the deeper their conversations grew, the more pieces of the past they began to unearth. One night after returning from a trauma support group meeting where Alex had, for the first time, spoken openly about Emma's death, they found themselves sitting at the small dining table in Lily's kitchen. The room was lit by the soft glow of a single lamp, and the city outside was unusually quiet for a summer night. The air felt thick, like it was holding on to the heat of the day, but neither of them noticed. They were too lost in their thoughts, their unspoken words weighing heavily between them. Lily cleared her throat, breaking the silence. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said at the meeting today, about how you felt like you lost more than just Emma in the accident, like you lost a part of yourself too." Alex's eyes flickered with recognition. He hadn't expected her to bring it up. He had spoken the words at the meeting almost without thinking, but now, hearing them echoed back to him, they felt heavier. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "It's like, after she was gone, I didn't know who I was anymore. Everything I thought my life was supposed to be, everything I was working toward, just disappeared in that one moment. And without her, without that future we were supposed to have, I didn't know how to live anymore." Lily nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "I think I understand that," she said quietly. "I felt the same way after my dad died. It wasn't just losing him. It was losing the person I thought I was going to be with him still in my life. It's like the world shifts and suddenly you don't recognize yourself anymore." Alex looked at her, his brow furrowing in empathy. "Yeah, exactly. And it's not just the grief. It's the guilt. I mean, I was the one driving the car that night. I keep thinking that if I had just done something differently, if I had been paying more attention, maybe. Lily interrupted gently, her voice firm but compassionate. You can't keep doing that to yourself, Alex. You can't keep blaming yourself for something that was out of your control. I know it's hard to accept, but sometimes things just happen, and there's no way we could have changed them. I spent years thinking that if I had just been there for my brother more, if I had been stronger for my mom after my dad died, maybe Derek wouldn't have disappeared. But I've come to realize that it's not my fault, and it's not your fault either. Alex looked down at his hands, his fingers tracing the edge of the table. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to let go of the guilt that had been gnawing at him for years. But it wasn't that simple. It was like an anchor holding him down, refusing to let him move forward. Lily's mention of her brother hadn't gone unnoticed, though. It was something she rarely talked about, and the fact that she had brought it up now told Alex that it weighed heavily on her, too. He had never met Derek, but from the way Lily spoke about him, it was clear that his disappearance had left a wound in her that still hadn't healed. Do you ever wonder where he is? Alex asked hesitantly, not wanting to push too hard but feeling like the question needed to be asked. Lily sighed, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of her brother's absence pressed down on her all at once. All the time, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I've tried looking for him over the years. I went to some of the shelters, asked around, but it's like he just vanished. I don't even know if he's still alive. Alex's heart tightened at the thought. He had seen people disappear in that way. People who slipped through the cracks, lost in the chaos of the streets, the addiction, the despair. But he didn't want to imagine that for Derek, not after everything Lily had already been through. Lily, he said softly, I think, I think I might have seen him. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise. What? When? A few months ago, Alex said, thinking back to the time before he had met Lily. There was a shelter downtown, one I used to go to when things got really bad. There was this guy there. He didn't talk much, kept to himself, but he looked familiar. I didn't know why at the time, but now, hearing you talk about Derek, I think it might have been him. Lily's breath caught in her throat, her mind racing. Could it be? After all these years, after all the dead ends and unanswered questions, could Alex have really seen her brother? Part of her wanted to believe it, wanted to hold on to the hope that Derek was still out there, still alive. But another part of her, the part that had learned not to get her hopes up, was cautious, afraid to let herself believe in something that might only lead to more heartache. Are you sure? She asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of hope and fear. I'm not sure, Alex admitted, but it's worth checking out, right? I mean, if there's even a chance that it was him. Lily nodded, her hands clenched in her lap. She didn't want to get her hopes up, but the thought of finding Derek, of being able to help him, was too powerful to ignore. Yeah, she said, her voice steadier now. It's worth checking out. The next day, they set out on a mission to find Derek. It was a daunting task, and they both knew it wouldn't be easy. The city was vast and the shelter system was chaotic at best. But Lily was determined, and Alex, sensing how much this meant to her, was just as committed to helping her in any way he could. They started with the shelter Alex had mentioned, asking around, describing Derek to anyone who might have seen him. The first few shelters yielded little information. Most of the people there either didn't recognize the description or had seen too many faces to remember anyone in particular. But Lily refused to give up. As the day wore on, they visited more shelters, moving through different neighborhoods, talking to staff members, volunteers, and the people who used the shelters themselves. By the time they reached the last shelter on their list, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the city streets. Lily's hope had dimmed with the daylight, and Alex could see the weariness in her eyes. But he also knew that giving up wasn't an option for her. Not when it came to Derek. Inside the shelter, the atmosphere was much the same as the others. People milling about, some sitting in small groups, others keeping to themselves. A volunteer directed them to the shelter manager, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Lily explained who they were looking for, showing her an old photo of Derek. The woman studied the photo for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I think I've seen him, she said, her voice cautious. He comes in from time to time, but he doesn't stay long. Keeps to himself. Never gives a name, but he looks a lot like the man in this picture. Lily's heart leapt into her throat. Do you know where he goes when he leaves here? The woman shook her head. I'm sorry, I don't. But there's a motel a few blocks from here where some of the regulars stay when they can scrape together enough money. You might want to check there. With a nod of thanks, Lily and Alex left the shelter and headed for the motel. The streets were quieter now, the air cooler as night fell. Neither of them spoke much, the tension building as they drew closer to what could either be the answer Lily had been searching for or another disappointment in a long line of them. When they arrived at the motel, it was clear that this was not the kind of place anyone stayed at by choice. The building was old, its paint peeling and the windows dirty. A flickering neon sign above the door cast a dull red glow over the entrance. Lily hesitated for a moment, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. The motel's lobby was small and dingy, with a bored-looking clerk sitting behind the counter. Lily approached him, her voice steady as she asked if he had seen a man matching Derek's description. The clerk barely glanced up from the TV screen he was watching, but after a moment, he pointed down the hall. Third room on the left. He's been there a few days now. Lily's heart raced as she and Alex made their way down the hall, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the cracked tiles. When they reached the door, Lily paused, her hand hovering over the doorknob. She had spent so many years wondering where her brother was, wondering if she would ever find him. Now, standing on the other side of the door, she realized how unprepared she was for this moment. Alex placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Whatever happens, we'll get through it, he said quietly. Lily nodded, steeling herself before knocking on the door. There was a long, agonizing pause, and for a moment she thought no one was going to answer. But then the door creaked open, and there he was. Derek. He was a shadow of the person she remembered. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, and his clothes hung loosely on his frail frame. His once vibrant hair was now unkempt and thinning. But it was him, undeniably him. Lily's breath caught in her throat as she looked at him, her emotions swirling between relief, shock, and a deep, aching sadness. Derek, she whispered, her voice trembling. It's me, Lily. For a moment, Derek just stared at her, as though trying to piece together who she was. Then recognition flickered in his eyes, but it wasn't the kind of joyful reunion Lily had been hoping for. Instead, his expression darkened, a scowl forming on his face. What the hell are you doing here? He snapped, his voice rough and hostile. Lily stood frozen in the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest as Derek's words stung like a slap. She had imagined this moment so many times, rehearsed it in her mind, always picturing it as some kind of emotional reunion. But the man standing in front of her wasn't the brother she remembered. His eyes, once so full of life and mischief, were now clouded with anger, resentment, and something much darker that Lily couldn't yet identify. He looked at her like she was a stranger. Derek, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. It's me. It's Lily. I know who you are, Derek snapped, his voice laced with bitterness. What the hell do you want? Why are you here? Lily blinked, taken aback by the venom in his tone. She had been searching for him for so long, clinging to the hope that finding him would somehow bring them both some kind of closure, some kind of healing. But now that she was standing in front of him, all she could feel was the widening chasm between them, a void that years of absence had deepened. I came to find you, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I've been looking for you for years, Derek. I didn't know if you were alive or... Well, now you know, Derek interrupted coldly. He glanced at Alex, who stood a few steps behind Lily, his presence steady but silent. Derek's eyes narrowed. And who's this? Your boyfriend or something? Lily shook her head quickly, ignoring the jab. No, this is Alex. He's helping me. We're just worried about you, Derek. Derek let out a harsh, bitter laugh. Worried about me? That's rich, Lily. Where was all this worry when I needed it? Where were you when everything went to shit? The accusation hung in the air between them like a blade, cutting through whatever thin thread of hope Lily had been holding on to. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Her mind raced, trying to find the right thing to say, something that would break through the wall Derek had built around himself. But the truth was, she didn't have an answer. She had been there when their father died, struggling to hold herself together, to take care of their mother, but she hadn't been able to save Derek. She hadn't been able to pull him back from the edge before he fell into the world of drugs, addiction, and whatever life had become for him now. "I didn't abandon you," Lily said, her voice breaking. "I tried, Derek. I tried to reach out. But you left," Derek spat, his eyes flashing with fury. "You didn't try hard enough, did you? You had your perfect little life, your perfect job, while I was out here drowning." The venom in his voice struck her hard, making her flinch. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to let them fall. She had been through too much to break now. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to leave without at least trying to get through to him. "You don't know what my life has been like," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "You don't know what I've been through, Derek. I lost Dad, too. We both did. And I've spent years trying to keep it together, trying to help other people because I couldn't help you. But I never stopped looking for you. I never stopped worrying about you." Derek's expression wavered for a moment, something almost like doubt flickering in his eyes. But just as quickly, it vanished, replaced by the same hardened look he had worn when he first opened the door. "You're too late, Lily," he said flatly. "There's nothing left to save." Alex, who had been silent up until now, took a step forward. His presence was calm but firm, like an anchor in the storm that was brewing between the siblings. He met Derek's gaze, his voice steady and measured. "That's not true," Alex said quietly. "It's never too late." Derek scoffed, turning his attention to Alex. "And what do you know about it? You don't know me. You don't know what I've been through." "No," Alex agreed, his voice calm. "I don't know your story, but I know mine. I know what it's like to feel like there's nothing left, like you've fallen so far that you can't find your way back. I was in that place not too long ago." Derek crossed his arms, clearly unimpressed. "And now you're some kind of savior? You think you're going to fix me?" Alex shook his head. "No, I'm not here to fix you. No one can do that for you. But I'm telling you, there's a way out of this. It's not easy. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do. But it's possible. I'm proof of that." Lily watched as Derek's defensive posture faltered for a split second. His gaze flickered between Alex and Lily, uncertainty creeping into his hardened expression. For the first time since they had found him, it seemed like a tiny crack was forming in the wall Derek had built around himself. "You don't have to believe me," Alex continued, his voice soft but resolute. "But I've been where you are. I lost everything, too. And for a long time I thought I didn't deserve to find my way back. But people like Lily, they don't give up on you, even when you've given up on yourself." Derek's jaw clenched and he looked away, his expression conflicted. He stood in the doorway, the room behind him dark and cluttered, the motel walls a reflection of his life, crumbling, neglected, and forgotten. Lily could see it now, how far her brother had fallen, and it broke her heart to think of how long he had been living like this, alone and angry. But she also saw something else, something that Alex had sparked. Derek wasn't unreachable, not yet. There was still a glimmer of the boy she had grown up with, the brother who had once been her protector, her closest friend. And even if Derek didn't believe in himself, Lily wasn't going to give up on him. Not now. Not after everything. "Derek," she said softly, stepping closer, "please let me help you. I can't change the past, and I'm sorry if you feel like I failed you. But I'm here now. I'm not leaving you again." For a long moment, Derek didn't respond. The silence stretched between them, heavy and full of unsaid things. But then slowly, he exhaled, the tension in his body easing just slightly. His arms dropped to his sides, and when he looked at Lily again, his expression wasn't as hard as it had been before. "Why would you want to help me?" Derek asked, his voice quiet, almost broken. "I'm nothing now." "You're my brother," Lily said, tears finally slipping down her cheeks. "That's all that matters." Derek stared at her, his eyes searching her face as if trying to find something. Some proof that she meant what she was saying. After what felt like an eternity, he nodded, his shoulders sagging, as though the weight of the world had finally become too much for him to bear alone. "Okay," he whispered. "I'll try." Relief flooded through Lily, and she reached out, pulling Derek into a hug. He stiffened at first, unused to the warmth of her embrace, but after a moment, he relaxed, his arms wrapping around her in return. For the first time in years, they stood there, two broken pieces of the same family, trying to find their way back to each other. Alex watched from a few steps away, his heart heavy but hopeful. He knew this was just the beginning of a long, difficult road for Derek, but he also knew that if anyone could make it, it was him, with Lily by his side. The next few days were a blur of small, tentative steps. Derek agreed to check into a rehab center, though not without some resistance. He had been living in the shadows for so long that the thought of stepping back into the light, of confronting his addiction and his pain, terrified him. But Lily was there, every step of the way, offering him the same unwavering support she had given to Alex when they first met. And Alex, in turn, stayed by Lily's side, quietly encouraging both siblings as they navigated the rocky terrain of recovery. Rehab wasn't easy for Derek. There were days when he wanted to quit, when the cravings gnawed at him so fiercely that he thought he couldn't stand it anymore. But every time he felt like giving up, Lily was there, reminding him of why he was doing this, reminding him that he still had a future, no matter how bleak it might seem in the moment. As the weeks passed, Derek began to improve, little by little. The angry, bitter man they had found in that motel room slowly gave way to someone else, someone more vulnerable, more willing to accept help. It wasn't a complete transformation, and there were still days when the weight of his past threatened to pull him under. But there were also moments of hope, moments when Derek allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could build a new life for himself. For Alex, watching Derek's progress was like looking into a mirror. He saw so much of his own journey in Derek, the pain, the fear, the doubt, and it made him realize how far he had come himself. With Lily's support, he had managed to pull himself out of the darkness, and now he was helping someone else do the same. But it wasn't just Derek who was healing. Lily, too, was going through her own process of recovery. She had spent so many years carrying the weight of her father's death, of her brother's disappearance, and now, for the first time, she was beginning to let some of that burden go. She was realizing that healing wasn't about erasing the past, but about finding a way to move forward with it, to carry the pain without letting it consume her. One afternoon, as they sat together in the rehab center's visiting room, Derek looked at Lily and Alex, his expression more open than it had been in a long time. He still looked fragile, like a man who had been through the ringer and was just starting to find his footing again. But there was a glimmer of something in his eyes, something that hadn't been there before. "I've been thinking," Derek said, his voice quiet but steady, "about what comes next." Lily and Alex exchanged a glance, both of them waiting for him to continue. "I don't want to go back to the way things were," Derek said, his gaze fixed on the floor. I want to do something that matters. I want to help people, like you two have helped me." Lily's heart swelled with pride. This was the brother she had been searching for all these years. Not the man who had been lost to addiction, but the man who had always had a kind heart, even when he had been too broken to show it. "You can," she said, her voice full of quiet conviction, "and we'll be with you every step of the way." And with those words, a new chapter in their lives began. The morning of the opening ceremony for Second Chance House dawned with a gentle light that filtered through the curtains of Lily's apartment. The days leading up to this moment had been filled with a flurry of activity, long conversations, and planning sessions that stretched late into the night. Despite the exhaustion that clung to her, Lily felt an unfamiliar sense of anticipation. It was a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to fully embrace in years. Hope. As the sun began to rise, casting a soft glow over the city, Lily sat at her kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee and reflecting on how far they had come. The idea for Second Chance House had been born out of the experiences she, Alex, and Derek had shared. It wasn't just a shelter or a temporary fix for people in need. It was a space for healing, for transformation. A place where those who had been knocked down by life could find the support they needed to rebuild, much like the way Lily had rebuilt herself after finding Alex and after reconnecting with Derek. Lily's thoughts drifted to her brother Derek. He had made tremendous progress since the day they'd found him living in that dingy motel, but it had not been an easy road. Rehab had been grueling, filled with moments of doubt, anger, and pain. There were times when Derek wanted to walk away from it all, convinced that he was beyond saving. But each time, Lily had been there, standing firm by his side, refusing to let him go. She saw now that Derek had always been worth saving, and through the long months of recovery, he was starting to see it too. In the days after rehab, Derek had expressed a desire to do more than just survive. He wanted to give back, to help others who were struggling with the same demons he had faced. It was during one of these late-night talks, when the weight of their shared pain felt a little lighter, that the concept of Second Chance House had emerged. They had talked for hours, brainstorming what it could be: a support center, a safe haven, a community hub where people could find the resources they needed to start over, no matter how far they'd fallen. Alex had been the one to suggest the name, and it stuck, resonating deeply with all of them. Now, months later, Second Chance House was a reality. The building itself was modest, an old community center that had been vacant for years. It took weeks of cleaning, painting, and organizing to get it ready for the opening. But with help from local businesses and volunteers, they had transformed it into something special. The walls, once faded and peeling, were now covered in fresh coats of paint in warm, inviting colors. The rooms, once empty and echoing with neglect, were now filled with furniture, art, and small touches that made the space feel like a home rather than just a facility. There were rooms for therapy sessions, both individual and group, spaces for workshops where people could learn skills to help them find work or reintegrate into society, and even a cozy kitchen where meals could be shared. But the heart of the building was the common room, a large open space filled with comfortable chairs, bookshelves, and a mural painted by a local artist that depicted a phoenix rising from the ashes. It was a symbol of rebirth, of the resilience that each person who walked through those doors could tap into, no matter how lost they felt. Lily sipped her coffee, her mind drifting to Alex. He had been a constant source of strength throughout the entire process, quietly guiding her and Derek through their respective journeys while continuing his own recovery. Alex had come a long way from the defeated man she had found sitting in the subway station that day. He was working again, doing freelance architecture jobs, and had started reconnecting with old colleagues who had been more than willing to give him a second chance. He was no longer just surviving, he was thriving. And today he would stand beside her and Derek as they officially opened the doors to Second Chance House, the three of them united by their shared experiences and their determination to help others find their way back from the brink. A soft knock on the door pulled Lily from her thoughts. She looked up as Derek entered the kitchen, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He looked healthier now, more grounded. His face still carried the shadows of the man he had been during his darkest days. But there was a brightness to him now, a spark of life that had been absent for so long. "You're up early," Derek said, pouring himself a cup of coffee and joining her at the table. "I couldn't sleep," Lily admitted with a small smile. "Too much going on in my head. Today's the big day." Derek nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "Yeah, it is. Hard to believe we're actually here." There was a quiet moment between them, a shared understanding that neither needed to put into words. This moment was more than just the culmination of months of hard work. It was a testament to how far they had come as a family, how far Derek had come as a person. It was a victory, not just over their pasts, but over the belief that they would never be able to move forward from it. "You nervous?" Lily asked, watching him carefully. Derek shrugged, though there was a hint of vulnerability in his expression. "A little, I guess. I've never done anything like this before. It feels big." Lily reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "You're going to be great, Derek. We've all been through so much to get here. You deserve to be proud of yourself." Derek looked at her, his eyes softening. "I couldn't have done it without you, Lil. You didn't give up on me when I gave up on myself. I'm I'm really grateful for that. Lily felt a lump rise in her throat, but she pushed it down, squeezing his hand. We didn't give up on each other. That's what matters. The rest of the morning passed quickly. Alex arrived not long after Derek, a bundle of nervous energy that made Lily smile. He had spent the previous day overseeing the final touches at the center, making sure everything was perfect for the opening. They had invited a small group of people to the ceremony, members of the community who had supported the project, local business owners, and a few of the trauma survivors who had been a part of Alex's support group. It wasn't going to be a large affair, but it was going to be meaningful. As they made their way to Second Chance House, Lily couldn't help but feel a swell of pride as the building came into view. The old community center, which had once been neglected and forgotten, now stood as a beacon of hope. The sign outside, freshly painted in bold letters, read, "Second Chance House, a place for healing, a place for hope." People were already starting to gather in front of the building, and as Lily, Derek, and Alex approached, they were greeted with warm smiles and words of encouragement. Lily's heart swelled as she saw the faces of the people who had supported them through the journey. Each one a reminder that this project wasn't just theirs. It belonged to the community. The ceremony itself was simple but heartfelt. There was a small podium set up outside the entrance, where Lily, Alex, and Derek would each say a few words. As they gathered behind the podium, Lily felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She hadn't expected to feel so overwhelmed. But standing there with Alex and Derek by her side, she realized just how much this moment meant. Alex was the first to speak. His voice, usually so quiet and reserved, carried a strength that surprised even him. He talked about his own journey, about the day Lily found him in the subway station, and about how much her kindness had changed his life. He spoke about the importance of second chances, about how everyone deserved the opportunity to rebuild, no matter how far they had fallen. As he spoke, Lily watched the faces of the people in the crowd. Many of them were nodding in agreement, their eyes filled with understanding. These were people who knew what it was like to struggle, to fight their way back from the brink. Alex's words resonated with them because they had lived it too. When Alex finished, there was a round of applause, and he stepped back from the podium, giving Lily a small, encouraging nod. It was her turn now. Lily took a deep breath as she stepped forward. She had rehearsed what she was going to say, but now that she was standing in front of everyone, the words seemed to take on a life of their own. "This place," she began, her voice steady, "was built on the belief that no one is ever beyond saving, that no matter how lost you feel, no matter how broken you think you are, there is always a way back. We've all been through our own struggles, our own dark times. But we're here today because we chose to believe in hope. We chose to believe in each other." She paused, looking out at the crowd, her gaze lingering on Alex and Derek. Second Chance House isn't just a place for shelter. It's a place for healing. It's a place where people can come when they feel like they've lost everything and find a community that will help them rebuild. We all deserve a second chance, and that's what this place is all about. Another round of applause erupted, but Lily barely registered it. She was focused on the people in front of her, on the faces of those who had come to celebrate this moment with them. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for each and every one of them. Finally, it was Derek's turn. He hesitated for a moment before stepping forward. Public speaking wasn't something he was used to, and Lily could see the nerves etched in his posture. But when he began to speak, his voice was clear, raw with honesty. "I never thought I'd be standing here today," Derek said, his eyes flicking down to the podium. "I spent a long time thinking that I didn't deserve a second chance. I thought I was too far gone. But then, my sister found me, and she didn't give up on me, even when I had given up on myself." His voice wavered for a moment, but he pushed through. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know one thing. It's because of people like Lily and Alex that I'm standing here today. They believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. And now I want to give back. I want to help others find their way, just like they helped me." When he finished, there was a moment of quiet, as if everyone was absorbing the weight of his words. Then the applause came, louder than before, filled with genuine appreciation for Derek's courage in standing before them, sharing his story. After the speeches, there was a small ribbon-cutting ceremony, And then the doors to Second Chance House were officially opened. People began to filter inside, exploring the rooms, chatting with each other, and taking in the atmosphere of warmth and hope that permeated the space. Lily, Alex, and Derek stood back for a moment, watching as the vision they had worked so hard to bring to life unfolded before their eyes. It was a humbling experience, seeing how something that had started as a conversation, a dream, had become a reality that would impact so many lives. As the sun set on that transformative day, the three of them stood together, side by side, knowing that they had created something truly special. Second Chance House wasn't just a building. It was a testament to the power of resilience, to the strength of the human spirit, and to the belief that no one is ever beyond hope.